Once, the skies over mountain towns in northern Arizona were known for the cleanest air in the nation. Now, due to the U.S. Forest Service and prescribed burning, this is no longer true. During the Dust Bowl, we taught Oklahoma farmers better plowing practices. With the passage of the Clean Water Act, we began reclaiming the waters of the Great Lakes. Since then, we have set aside grasslands, desert, and riparian habitats for future generations. But this is the first time in our country's history that the remediation of an ecosystem, as with the reintroduction of fire into our western forests by the Forest Service, requires that our citizens become sickened, disabled, and die an early death. First and foremost, this is a public health issue. In 2006, the American Thoracic Society released a study which found that for an increase of 10 micrograms per cubic meter of PM10 over 2 years, the risk of dying was increased by 32% for people with diabetes, 28% for people with COPD, 27% for people with congestive heart failure, and 22% for people with inflammatory disease such as rheumatoid arthritis or lupus. The study significantly strengthens evidence that breathing in particulate matter is associated with dying sooner. There is no safe level of particulate air pollution, said Joel Schwartz, Ph.D., professor of environmental epidemiology at the Harvard School of Public Health in Boston. 90% of wood smoke is PM 2.5 or smaller and passes through closed doors and windows. Smaller than some bacteria, these particles can penetrate into the deepest recesses of the lungs and into the bloodstream where they attack vital organs. Some of these particles remain in the lungs for extended periods, while others are carried to lymph nodes by scavenger cells. These tiny dagger-shaped particles are particularly harmful to children since they can penetrate deep into their lungs. Today, 1 in 7 children have asthma. Smoke particles also exacerbate many health problems experienced by the elderly. In 2014, New Zealand found that reducing the particulate levels in their air by 8% yielded an astounding 15% reduction in hospital admissions. Besides fine particulate matter, smoke from prescribed and managed burns and slash piles contains over 100 chemicals that have not been adequately studied. One particularly hazardous toxin is mercury. Scientists estimate that fires in the continental U.S. and Alaska release 44 metric tons of mercury into the atmosphere every year. In a 2001 study, researchers collected ground litter samples and foliage from 7 forests throughout the continental U.S. These samples were set alight at a U.S. Forest Service fire laboratory and large amounts of mercury were emitted. The samples released 94 to 99% of all the mercury stored in the foliage. All coniferous and deciduous samples contained mercury at levels ranging from 14 to 71 nanograms per gram of fuel. Mercury is dangerous when it ends up in waterways, where it can transform into methylmercury as it bioaccumulates up the food chain. Mercury causes its greatest damage to unborn fetuses and newborns, including developmental defects, reduced IQ, mental retardation, learning disabilities, behavior problems, and chronic neurological diseases. Already, Arizona lakes such as Roosevelt, Tonto Creek, Lyman Lake, Soldier Lake, and Upper and Lower Lake Mary post mercury warnings that the fish are not safe for consumption. New research from Pacific Northwest laboratories has detected gene-altering plant alkaloids in prescribed burn smoke. Plants use alkaloids for protection, enabling them to poison other plants, animals, and humans. Smoke-related alkaloids are capable of changing the aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems. The results of the study warn that smoldering fires may produce more alkaloid-related toxins than wildfires. The Forest Service repeatedly cites the monetary savings of using fire as a tool. Clearly, the true cost of using prescribed and managed burns is directly shifted to the healthcare system, school and work absences, along with disability and life insurance. Besides humans, smoke particulates affect wildlife and pets. Smoke particulates can travel great distances and be deposited miles from the source. In this case, approximately 60 miles away, a heavy layer of ash was deposited in this water pan. Not only are prescribed burns a serious health hazard that the public should not accept, but they also have a negative economic impact on mountain towns. Tourism is a major industry for most of Arizona's sleepy little mountain towns. Hiking and water sports in the spring and summer, fall foliage tours, and skiing in the winter. Who is going to want to come to these attractions with smoke ever present? Citizens of northern Arizona and other states concerned about the impact of smoke on downwind populations have offered alternatives to burning. 1. Change our outdated timber export laws. In the 1970s, Japan and other Pacific Rim countries in need of timber began buying from the Pacific Northwest public lands and sinking it in bogs for later use, much like a savings account. They would then mill it on their offshore processing ships as needed. To prevent this practice, which circumvented the employment of the U.S. lumber mills, Congress passed a series of protection laws beginning in the 1970s, which led to the prohibition of harvesting timber from public lands west of the 100th meridian for export in its unmilled form. 40 years later, with an abundance of dead and dying trees throughout the West, this well-meaning legislation has outlived its usefulness in its current form. 2. Thin until the distance between trees or clumps of trees prevents crown fires. If the public knew the true cost of chronic exposure to this smoke, they would shout down the death grip that various nature groups have on the trunk diameter size. 3. Chip the slash piles for export, similar to the recent contract with Good Earth Power and their export plant to China and the UK. 4. Provide air tankers and lengthen runways for mountain towns so they can put out wildland fires within the first half hour of ignition. 5. Utilize goat grazing to clear out ladder fuels, including shrubs and saplings, a technique that land managers throughout the West are already using. Goat grazing is cheaper than fighting a wildfire and doesn't shift the cost to our healthcare system. Goat grazing can then be followed with carefully managed cattle grazing to prevent the regrowth of ladder fuels. In the end, we must look at the ethics of what each group proposes. If any proposal requires the chronic exposure of downwind populations to prescribed, managed, and slash-pile smoke, then they are essentially asking human beings to become sickened, disabled, and die an early death for the sake of whatever their vision of a healthy forest is. When the Forest Service and the nature groups say that fire is nature's way of thinning the forest, we remind them that cholera is nature's way of thinning human populations. Unbridled nature is not always merciful to human beings and therefore should not be the final arbiter in every ecological decision. The only way such a sacrifice could be justified is to believe that human beings are only ancillary on Earth, and their suffering is insignificant in the greater picture of the enlightened workings of nature. To proceed with this massive prescribed burn plan without the public's full and informed knowledge that members of their family will suffer increased morbidity and mortality from breathing chronic smoke would be unthinkable, inexcusable, and indefensible. It is a violation of the most fundamental human rights to impose risks upon individuals without their consent. Human rights should not be sacrificed to the pursuit of a healthy economy, affluence, progress, science, or any other goal. The whole benefit versus risk doctrine is a profound violation of human rights. The Forest Service is developing the 4 Forest Restoration Initiative in Arizona that will ramp up prescribed burning to unprecedented levels. How can the EPA be concerned about pollution from coal-fired power plants, yet turn a blind eye to massive, frequent particulate emissions from prescribed burning? You cannot light a gram of tobacco in public airspace, but you can put millions of pounds of toxins and carcinogens into the air in the name of restoring forest health. The government puts warning labels on cigarettes that they might cause cancer and taxes them heavily, then turns around and gives millions of dollars to the Forest Service to put massive amounts of smoke into the air. Doesn't anyone see the contradiction in these policies? Pleas from the public to regard the health problems caused by prescribed burns are rebuffed by the Forest Service. They minimize the health effects of smoke, describing it as visible, annoying, not enjoyable, frustrating, undesirable, natural, or necessary. Regardless of what the Forest Service claims, smoke inversions from prescribed burns frequently occur in Arizona. The Forest Service and our local state air quality agency suggest staying indoors on smoky days, even though the Forest Service plans to burn as many days as possible for the next 20 years. We are rural counties. Our children wait for school buses on rural highways. Our neighbors tend cattle, horses, fowl, and large gardens. Imagine the perfect day filled with sunshine, clean air, and little wind, a day to spend watching first graders on a soccer field. It is also the perfect day to conduct prescribed burns in the 4 forests upwind to you. So, in summary, prescribed burn smoke shortens the lives of humans and animals, pollutes our waterways with mercury, potentially alters human genes, discourages tourism, and costs society more in the end. Every citizen is harmed by smoke, whether they are made aware of the harm by the Forest Service or not. So we must ask, what kind of future do we want for ourselves and our children? This or this? The Forest Service has no moral right to affect our children's health and future so profoundly without the public's informed knowledge and consent. There are healthier ways to manage the forest. We must take action and stand against this archaic practice of prescribed burning. Thank you for watching.